Hello and welcome to another round of Tuesday Night Legacy brought to you by Spellhold Games, where we get to showcase Magic's most powerful formats. I'm Bryson and I'll be your host this evening for round 2 of the April 8th single Elim Legacy event. Tonight we've got James with Jeskai Control on the left, and we've got Matt with Blue-Red Delver on the right. Now James's Jeskai Control list is similar to the Jeskai Days Undoings, running the Days Undoing, Hole Breacher, and Narset package, but this deck differs by running 2 main deck The Wandering Emperors, as well as a Spell Pierce and a few other different numbers, but it's primarily trying to control the board state and prolong the game and eventually cross the finish line with either a Hole Breacher, Snapcaster, or a token generated from the Wandering Emperor. Where Matt's deck is trying to tempo his opponent out and stick a potent threat in the form of Delver of Secrets, Dragon's Rage Channeler, or Murktide Regent. 2 of these 3 threats being new Modern Horizons Prince, pushing the power level of Delver up far past 20% of the metagame. Enough with the introductions here. Let's get the games rolling. I believe James got the die roll here, and he's just going to be starting us off with a fetch land pass in the form of a Flooded Strand there. Matt is going to do the classic turn 1 Volcanic Island into Delver, establishing that threat immediately. And there he goes, deploying that Daze to set himself back tempo but protect the President, keep the Delver protected from that Swords to Plowshare that was going to try to pick it off. James, untapping into turn 2, immediately cracks his fetch land, grabs a basic island, and assuming he's going to have some other way to interact with this Delver or just ponder or brainstorm. There goes that brainstorm, cantripping away, allowing you to draw 3 cards and put the 2 least relevant cards on top of your library. Or if you're worried about hand disruption, you can hide any key pieces and save them for a more potent future turn. And there's another Swords taking care of that Delver. Matt follows up his turn 2 by replaying that land that he set himself back with and following it up with a Ponder. Thinking long and hard, looks like he likes what he sees. Plays a Bauble, peeks at the top of James's library and draws on upkeep, passes to him. James with his 3rd land drop now can play one of his key threats but decides to hold back and save some interaction for whatever Matt has available. Matt deciding to play his Tarn, as colored mana is critical as well as Wasteland, not really serving much of a purpose against James's almost mono basic mana base. Matt with another fetch land decides to bobble himself to get a pseudo card advantage. Doesn't like what he sees, so decides to crack his fetch land, clear the top card. And I saw a Murktide hanging out in his hand. It's not too juicy, only coming in with an additional 2 counters, but it might still be the play here as it puts another threat. There goes that Murktide. Have to pitch 5 cards, but they're well worth it. Not only is it a flying threat, but it can come in as far greater than a 3/3. James, respecting this, most likely not having removal, deploys his Force, which is met by another Force on Matt's part, sticking that Murktide Regent. And he pitched his other Murktide Regent to the Force of Will, signaling he probably either has more threats or is really pushing to get this one to stick. Matt now crashing through here, dropping that Wasteland now. No good targets, just sitting in play. James now resolving a Narset, pretty strong against a deck full of Brainstorms, Ponders, and other things, as it negates the additional card draw while not only replacing itself with that Plow that he's found, but provides a good threat, or it's a good target for the threats to be swinging at, potentially saving him life. Which this Murktide looks like it was going towards the Narset. And Matt's most likely going to be looking for a Plains here to crack back with his Swords to Plowshare on the Murktide Regent. Pushing Matt up to 23 life there. protecting his Narset to get another card draw out of it. Or not card draw, a -2. That's taken care of with a bolt there. James now with a Ponder, looking for probably another Planeswalker or another answer to one of Matt's threats. I think he's found another Narset there. No, I'm not sure what he got there, but he likes what he saw. Remarking on his sad Hallowed Fountain not going to be able to produce mana because it's most likely going to get wastelanded before he has the chance. Now, James here responding to Matt's Brainstorm. Not usually something someone responds to. Decides to respond with a Brainstorm of his own after clearing the top with that Prismatic Vista. I'm assuming he's got the Hull Breacher, which would be devastating for Matt, but fortunately Matt had the Lightning Bolt. The Hull Breacher would have forced Matt to put 2 cards from his hand on top of his library, while James would generate 3 treasures along the way. Matt using Bolt to clean up that Hull Breacher, not allowing it to affect his game plan there. There goes that predicted Wasteland, taking out that Hallowed Fountain. And DRC coming into play and immediately getting value from that 0-drop Mishra's Bauble, triggering that Surveil. Now another Narset comes down, and it finds the Wandering Emperor, a flash Planeswalker, allowing you to interact with the board state on multiple axes, being able to produce creatures and exile them. Now here is a mistake that happened here, as the Delirium condition has not been met yet when this Dragon's Rage Channeler came across and took out the Narset. Unfortunately, this isn't caught until after numerous game actions are made with the Expressive Iteration and the Ponder being cast. After that, with that Ponder causing that Surveil, that's when James probes the yard again, and Matt looks through and they realize that something is clearly amiss, and they get a judge called over, and the judge ruling resolves the situation by backing up the damage to the Narset, but we couldn't back up the Ponder or Expressive Iteration. And now it is very clear that the Dragon's Rage Channeler is delirious because it has met the 4 different card types. And instead of the Narset being in the graveyard, it only took 1 damage from that combat, since the Dragon's Rage Channeler was only at 1/1. Now with the board state relatively restored, the Ponder resolves, and it's back to James. James now with his Narset on 2, and he's got a Wanderer, Forcible, and 1 Unknown in hand. Seems like decides to cash in the Narset with the -2, finds a Force Negation, still has text in the matchup. Figures he passed the turn off, most likely minimum, seeing 3 damage. Decides now's the time to deploy the Wanderer, and he uses its -2 to exile target tapped creature, and he gains 2 life. So he's able to take out that Dragon's Rage Channeler straight to exile zone. Matt's able to resolve an Expressive Iteration while James is relatively tapped out. He's able to hit a Brainstorm off that iteration. Really eking the value out of this new card here, allowing you, specifically it does not say draw, which clearly has text since there was both a Narset and a Hull Breacher on James's side of the table, limiting Matt's cantrip potential. With Expressive Iteration simply putting the cards and exiling the cards, it's not explicitly drawing them. Very pertinent differential in rulings there. Matt now resolving that Brainstorm, putting back, seems like a land and Expressive Iteration. Not quite sure how he stacked that. But we're back to James here. James now plussing that Wanderer. Unfortunately, no creature in play. With the Wanderer too low for him to activate, he simply just pluses with no targets. Now, by the time next turn rolls around, he is able to now create a creature to now put +1/+1 counters on, as the Wanderer creates a 2/2 white Samurai with Vigilance. That's immediately petty thefted with the instant adventure side of Brazen Borrower, and now is being flashed in and deployed into play. So not only was it able to answer one of James's creatures, but now it's pressuring the clock. Or it was going to pressure the clock until it ate a Swords to Plowshare. Put Matt back up to 20 life. Refueling with another expressive iteration, which hit a Delver, amongst other things. Matt back presenting a threat, continuing to churn through the deck with the Mishra's Bauble. And James at the end step presents a Snapcaster Mage, targeting these, presumably these Swords to Plowshare, cleaning up that Delver. Now James with a clock in play, and he's able to put a +1/+1 counter from the Wander onto Snapcaster, increasing that clock, starting to really pressure now with 2 Planeswalkers in play. Immediately 3 Fairies answered, and a follow-up Force of Will from James, allowing the Teferi to stick, and using Teferi's -3 ability to bounce the Snapcaster Mage, trying to really eke all the value out of it, while also drawing a card along the way. Matt ripping that Murktide off the top, or had it lurking in his hand. And it looks like it's a dress down on James's part, negating the ability for Murktide to enter with additional counters, because now Murktide just enters as a flying 3/3, since dress down removes all abilities from the creature. Back to James's turn now, resolving a Ponder there with that Snapcaster hanging out in hand. Decides now's the time to deploy that Snapcaster, targeting that other Swords to Plowshare, taking care of the Murktide and using the Wander to put another +1/+1 counter on the Snapcaster. Matt, realizing there's no way he's getting out of this, scoops it up for game 2. Both players off the sideboarding. I'm assuming many blasts have made it into the main decks now. Pyroblast and Red Elemental Blast being very strong in these blue mirrors. As you can see, there's a Dragon's Rage Channeler now for Matt, getting value there with that Ponder. Likes what he sees, leaves it on top, decides to resolve the Ponder. I'm assuming he's going to keep considering the Surveil. And resolves the Ponder, plays his second land for the turn. Gets another Surveil, I'm assuming binning the top card off the bottom, just going straight for the Brainstorm. Liked all the cards on top. Puts back the 2 worst ones and nugs in for 1. James now on the second turn of the game shocks in a Sacred Foundry to immediately Prismatic ending that Dragon's Rage Tindler, not allowing Matt to gain more advantage from the Surveil effects. Matt now going for the turn 3 expressive iteration, allowing you to hit a land drop off the Exile, and immediately fires off that Wasteland off the EI and hits that Sacred Foundry. James now playing his third land of the turn with that Island. Key text being basic land there, Wasteland proof. And looks like no shuffle off that Ponder and passes. James cracking his fetch now. Looking for most likely a Island here. It goes for the Mountain. And now we see the Red Elemental Blast out of James's deck, being able to not only remove permanents in play, but also deal with permanents on the stack, being able to counter any target blue spell. Brainstorm being fired off there after James just goes land go. With that fetch land up at the ready, able to really maximize the value from that fetch land. Passes it back and James simply goes land go. Matt now deciding it's time to get that shock land out of the deck. The 5th Volcanic Island, since Delver is so color hungry, it needs all the sources of Izzet mana it can get. There goes that Delver, followed up by a Mishra's Bauble. Keep churning there. James swiftly firing off that second Red Elemental Blast to sweep up the Delver. Here comes that big Murky Reach from Matt here. Serious threat, hoping he's got another Red Elemental Blast, or there goes that Pyroblast. very similar text on this card, and it meets a force pitching Flusterstorm, signifying that Matt either has more gas in hand or that he's got some Pyroblaster. Yep, there goes the Pyroblast on Matt's side hitting that Snapcaster. Forcible resolves, and that Pyroblast is countered, and Murktide stays in play. Matt doing Protect the President right with one card in hand and one big threat in play. James now on the back foot here with looks like 2 cards in hand, and he's got a few turns here to answer this thing before it really pressures his life total. Immediately with the plow, sweeping that up. Now the pressure's off and it's back to pretty stable board state. Matt with a surprisingly large amount of lands in play, realizing the same thing, doesn't want to hit any more lands, so cracks both those fetch lands off. And it looks like we see the 6th Volcanic Island with 2 steam vents in the mana base here. Check the deck list here. Yeah, we got 2 steam vents. Expressive Iteration, finding a Daze and one other card. Interesting, exiling the Daze, allowing him to play around any counter magic from the Snapcaster deck, allowing him to resolve his own Narset, which I'm assuming came out of the sideboard. Finding that Expressive Iteration, refueling for next turn. Unfortunately, the Daze not seeing any use, but hits the bin. Prismatic Ending, cleaning up that Narset, not allowing for more card advantage from another -2. It already found this Expressive Iteration, which found another threat in Delver of Secrets. And followed up by a Murktide. Matt really putting the pedal to the metal here, getting one must-answer threat and another one that will put you into that must-answer range pretty soon. James starting off his turn there with a main phase Brainstorm. Can't really tell what he's got there, but his yard is loaded with answers, so if he can find a Snapcaster, he'd be in a good position, or either another Wanderer, or even a Teferi the Time Raveler to bounce and reset that Murktide, really slowing down Matt's attack strategy. Looks like that Brainstorm has resolved. He's just trying to make sure he's got the right land he's looking for. And looks like a tough decision here. Decides to go shotgun that Hollowed. I think he's going to go with most likely a basic. Goes with the basic island here. Not too worried about the white mana. Decides it's Narset time. Puts Narset on the stack, which quickly has Matt present a Force of Will, not allowing any of that to happen. Murktide and Delver pushing in here, getting James down to 4. James really just needs to hit a Wrath off the top, otherwise there's not really much else he can do here. Plowing that Murktide Regent, simply buying him 4 to 1 turns, depending if this Delver flips here. There's the Hull Breacher. I don't know. James got to have something to survive, but it looks like he doesn't have anything. And both players there would have shuffled up for a game 3, but unfortunately there wasn't enough time. And James gave the game to Matt, and Matt moved on to round 3. And you'll see his game against Pedro, against a similar Jeskai build, focusing more into the Jeskai, Days Undoing, running Shark Typhoons, as well as a few other things. But if you like that match and you're interested to see the intricacies of each player's deck list, feel free to check them out in the link below. And if you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing and liking. Every little bit helps us with the algorithm. And final special thanks to Spellhold Games for providing us the space to record these games and just being an awesome LGS. And thanks, and hopefully see you next time.